It's Ron Crabtree here, and thanks for joining me for a discussion about everyone's busy, nobody's aligned, and here's what that's costing you with a focus on AI. And part of the reason we're talking about this is, among other things, I host a podcast called Metapod, and I bring in thought leaders from around the world to talk about the three common challenges that manufacturers face, primarily in North America, but almost globally. The first is the forever labor shortage. The second is digitization, digital transformation, no conversation around that doesn't involve AI. And then finally, how to do a lot more with less, the endless pressure to do less with less of everything. And I've had some really good people coming in and talking about some of the big challenges companies face. And a lot of that's been around digitization and applying AI. I've also been hosting this year a series of AI and supply chain roundtables where I bring in executives from companies that work in supply chain and let them talk to one another about what's working, what's not working, learn what challenges are and how they're breaking through the challenges there. And then probably have had two or three other conversations with experts from different, data scientists to soup to nuts with folks that are dealing with what works, what doesn't, and getting the real return on investment out of AI and digital transformation. We're going to focus in on a couple of themes here. The first is the misalignment of teams around that, and the second is resistance to change as a core challenge to being successful and getting the return on investment we should. I'd like to note here that we're streaming this live in LinkedIn, but you can make comments as we go. I've got a team member monitoring that, so if you have something you want to ask or a question or a comment, you can post that, and the team will feed those through to me, and I'll try to handle those during this 20 minutes or so in this discussion. So since our focus on alignment and overcoming resistance to change, I'm going to start with a mini exercise. I'm going to ask you to kind of play with me here. I'm going to introduce an evergreen methodology I've used with thousands of people and hundreds of organizations to think about, how do we get aligned and how do we overcome resistance to change? And it's called the Sustainable Change Formula. And it's a simple formula of three different components, right? It's the level of discomfort you have in the organization. It's the vision that you're achieving in the organization. It's the skills you have to be successful in making the changes happen with respect to a major change initiative. So what I'd like you to do is give some little thought to what is a specific change initiative you'd like to drive leveraging AI in the near future. And there's different things that could involve. One might be, I need to become much faster in the quoting process. I need to become much more efficient in how we handle shipping to our customers. So give some thought to a very specific challenge you might be facing as an organization. Maybe it's predictive maintenance. We want to reduce unplanned downtime 30 to 50%, improving our overall equipment effectiveness. Maybe we want to improve visual quality inspection. We need some kind of a target for change there, like reducing defects 20 to 50%, improving our first pass yield. I mentioned quoting, right? Maybe it's that whole cycle time for quoting. Maybe we want to reduce the average cost of quoting 50%. Or maybe it's inventory optimization, reducing inventory carrying costs, improving inventory turns and things like that. So I want you to get into your head a specific challenge or problem that you want to use AI and other digital transformation tools to drive to some real improvement in that. You got to get that in your head. Now imagine you bring together a leadership team and you're thinking about this big change, and there's three different components, right? And I'm going to ask you to play with me here. The first is, with respect to the change we're looking for, how much of a burning platform do we have? Do people see the current state as dangerous? Are they dissatisfied with the current state? Or would they say, you know what, I really like it the way it is today. Why would I even want to do this change at all? Do I have a lot of discomfort? So you give it a value between 1%, meaning nobody's looking for this to happen. They like the way we do business today. They don't want us to do or be different. Status quo is just fine. And 100% seems like every single employee in the company is clamoring for us to do something with respect to this change you just framed up, right? Speeding up quoting, improving inventory, improving customer experience, whatever it may be. So you give that a scale between 1 and 100%. So you kind of get a number in your head. Then we think about the vision we've created. With respect to this change we're trying to make, exactly how clear are we on what good looks like? What's going to be different at the end of this? And that has to happen for every single stakeholder. Could I walk around and at random and talk to any of the stakeholders who would be involved in implementing this change, and would they be able to describe what that means to them, what that looks like? Would they understand what would actually change in their work? If they can articulate that super clearly, we have a very clear idea about what good looks like, how we're going to measure that, all of those good things. Maybe we're close to 100% on the vision side, but if we're not, like if I can walk around and talk to 10 different people and get 10 different answers, and it's running all over the place, I'm going to say we give a very low number here. So given that percentage of success you have with a clear vision, between 1% on the low side and 100%, if we're maxed out, we couldn't be more clear and specific, and every single stakeholder understands the role. The last component is skills. Do we currently have the skills needed by everyone who needs them? Now here's the operative word here. Everyone who needs them, every single stakeholder, everybody that needs to do something different with respect to the future state, do they actually have the skills to be able to execute on that in the current state? So 1% is they have none of the skills, we haven't even started training or doing anything, and 100% is, oh yeah, we got it. Everybody that needs to do something differently is fully trained, fully capable of doing things differently in that future state. So we give that a percentage. So here's the magic. You take those percentages and you multiply them times each other, right? Let's just say we're 50% of the way there on discomfort. Okay, great. But we're only 25% clear on the vision. So if you multiply 50% times 25%, what do you get? About 12.5%. And let's just say, we're 50% of the way there on the skills, right? We have a ways to go. You multiply it again, you come up with something really scary, like 5 or 10% ready for that future state change. So that little exercise is really helpful to think about those three quadrants. And where do we need to shore things up first, right? And have quality conversations around why do we have those gaps. Now let's come back to those two themes that I talked about earlier, right? Not having good alignment, missing alignment of teams in terms of what we're trying to do, and then this resistance to change is a core challenge to monetizing and getting the value out of our and the return on investment for AI. So with respect to the discomfort quadrant we just talked about in that exercise, without agreement by everybody who's affected on why to change, it's almost a non-starter, right? Employees would probably avoid or bypass these new tools. Fear and skepticism may dominate, and training might be completed, but adoption isn't so great. I'm going to mention a couple of my podcast guests, Anna Barnhill, and she specifically talked about the fear of AI replacing jobs creates friction. People may perform the motions, but while making sure the technology really doesn't replace the old way of doing things. There was Rocky Vienna saying adoption is one of the primary reasons that AI projects will fail. And going back to Anna, leaders must first embrace change themselves and then lead people through it. I really like what Natalie Bourne had to say in one of the podcasts. She said, change management belongs at the beginning so that people understand the journey and feel part of the change, not that the change is just happening to them. Jim Zellum talked about culture changes when leaders change their techniques and build the desired behaviors, right? Leader-led, not when they dictate the change. So if people only use the tool when somebody's watching, you don't really have adoption, and you have a compliance theater going on here. So the vision component that I talked about in the sustainable change formula that we went through, alignment comes before adoption can occur. So do people really understand what success looks like and why it's worth the effort to do this? Misaligned teams will often have different answers to what AI and digital transformation should achieve. Teams tend to focus on the tools, the platforms, the pilots, but the ownership can be very siloed and the priorities would definitely conflict. So one of my podcast guests brought up really good points here. Natalie Bourne. Leadership teams often move so fast through the agenda that they do not slow down enough to model curiosity and to ask better questions. And the magic word in AI I'm hearing is context. In 2026, the magic word about success with AI is all about context. Richard Ricks talked about many organizations don't have a real AI strategy or a plan, and culture then will show up as a major blockage. Then John Pastorino Frontline engagement requires leadership with a strong vision and a clear strategy behind the work. So I think you would agree that people can't commit to a change that leadership has not clearly defined. So we've got to be really good on that vision. So I'm going to go back to the discomfort thing for a second. Let's just pretend that you're not able to build that burning platform. A good conversation I could have with you is there's a really good evergreen article that came out of the Harvard Business Review talking about the tools of cooperation and change. And I'm not going to delve into those here for a lack of time, but it defines there's other ways to get by this whole resistance thing. If you can't build that burning platform, get people really excited about it. There's power tools, leadership tools, management tools, culture tools. And you can check that out. Look that up, Harvard Business Review, the tools of cooperation and change to learn more about it. Now I want to go to that third component in that sustainable change formula, is training, right? How far along are we? And this is really important for this conversation because training is a two-edged sword. Obviously, without training, you aren't going to be successful, right? It's just not going to happen. But as I'm listening to thought leaders and really working with organizations to actually do this sort of thing and adopting these kinds of technologies, you got to pay attention to a couple of red flags, right? The first is training is not adoption, right? It's kind of like correlation isn't causation in the Six Sigma practice. Well, just doing training doesn't mean you're going to get adoption. In fact, a lot of good AI projects might look great on paper. You've selected the vendor, the pilot seemed to work, the training is done, but then 3 months later, it seems like we're still doing what we always did and we're not measuring any real benefit. So training completion is not adoption. The pilot is not sustainable change. So here's something really important. Resistance is information, not just pushback. So if we're doing the training, but we're still seeing resistance, it's telling us as leaders, where in our strategy or communication, the ownership of the process, the workflow design is incomplete. Are employees afraid the tool will replace them? Do middle managers not really understand their role and are they not reinforcing or change? Do people know which decisions will bring the harm, will belong to them, And, if the new process is easier, cleaner, better than the old one, then that's not a bad thing. And is leadership listening to what frontline teams are saying about the real work that needs to be done? A couple more, great things said by podcast guests. Anna Barnhill. If fear of AI is not addressed right up front, your progress is going to stall. The training is going to be wasted. Natalie Bourne. Survey the team before the team and understand whether they're willing to go with you on that change journey. John Papalestino, right? Frontline teams often know the work, the frustrations and the processes and the informal realities much better than the people trying to design the system. So when we're going to do training, we've got to start way up front with what are we training them for, how are we training them, and how does that address the specific processes, changes that we're looking for in the future state. So just generic training about AI isn't good enough. It's the application, the context that we need people to follow. James Cuthbert on Metapod talked about middle managers and frontline managers have to be taken on the journey along as well, not just the senior leadership team. It needs to be highly inclusive, and this whole training challenge goes top to bottom. And one of the really good pieces of advice I have that I would give from leaders that I captured in the podcast a couple episodes ago, it's this admonition from thought leaders to saying, look, as a CEO, right, as a leader in your organization, you need to use AI. You need to understand what it is people are going to go through so that you can really be a good advocate and really walk the walk, walk the talk with respect to leveraging these sorts of tools in the future. So just remember this, resistance is not always defiance. Sometimes it's the it's the organization giving you information, right? They're telling you the change design is incomplete, which takes us back to the alignment of the teams and then perfecting how we deliver training to align to a really good strategy. Pilot can prove the work can happen, right? The pilot proves it can work, but sustainable change proves the organization can actually work differently. So I promised this wouldn't be a sales pitch, and I'm going to keep that promise. What I do want to give you is a practical way to take this conversation back to your team. It's called the AI Manufacturing Exposure Map, and it's not a complete diagnostic, deep dive thing. It's a very simple and quick exercise you can do with your leadership team in 20 minutes and really get started with a quality conversation. It helps you begin to see where your AI or digital transformation work may be most exposed, whether it's strategy, whether it's alignment, whether it's the data, whether it's the adoption, the execution, resistance to change, agility. What are the components that we worry about? And I would advocate have each leader complete that separately and then compare their answers. If your team disagrees on how we're going to answer the questions, it's not a problem with the map. The map's actually doing its job, right? The disagreement is where a real strategy work can get started, right? We begin to talk to one another and understand why we have differences of opinion and why that might look differently. Here's how you can get to the map. I'm going to show a little text bar here. Should pop up with text. And it's not popping up, so I'm just going to have to read this to you. So it's www.exposure-map.metaexperts.com. Okay, so I'm going to read that off again. www.exposure-map.metaexperts.com. Now, Kim Crabtree is going to post that, so it should be available to you in the feed here in LinkedIn. So I would suggest this. Before your next AI planning discussion of any kind, maybe you would have each leader complete that exposure map separately and then compare where those answers might differ. And then make some time on my calendar. Reach out. I'd love to have a 15-minute conversation with you just to kind of talk about where you're at in your journey, maybe perhaps how you're benchmarking against other organizations. I've certainly had a lot of those conversations, trying to understand where you are in a maturity curve, if you will, and where your biggest opportunities to move forward could happen. Again, you can check the comment by Kim Crabtree to get to that link, and I hope to talk to you very soon. Thank you for joining me.